You laughed at my daughter! Look at what you did to her! Please, I beg you, have mercy!
The saloon doors didn't swing. They shattered. Twelly. Eric Montgomery stood in the splintered frame, a Winchester resting loosely in the crook of his arm. He didn't glance at the trembling bartender or the fleeing deputies. His cold eyes locked dead on the wealthiest man in Colorado. You laughed at my daughter. The year was 1883, and the town of Silver Creek, Colorado, was a place where fortunes were ripped from the earth and human decency was often buried in the same hole. It was a town of stark divides. Down in the valley, the streets were lined with gas lamps, imported glass windows, and men who wore silk cravats to breakfast. Up in the jagged teeth of the Pine Ridge Mountains, life was measured in cords of wood, preserved meat, and survival. Eric Montgomery belonged to the high timber. He was a man carved from the very granite of the Rockies, tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard woven with early silver and eyes the color of a winter sky before a blizzard. 10 years prior, a harsh winter had taken his wife, leaving him with a newborn girl and a grief so profound he retreated entirely from the valleys of men. His daughter, Anna, was the sole warmth in his rugged life. Abby was 19 now, possessing her mother's fierce green eyes and a smile that could soften the hardest frontiersman. But life on the ridge had exacted a toll. A childhood bout with polio had left her right leg weakened, requiring a heavy, leather-bound iron brace crafted by the town blacksmith, Josiah Miller. She walked with a pronounced, dragging limp. To Eric, the rhythmic thud-drag of her step was the sound of a survivor. To the high society vultures of Silver Creek, it was a target. It was the first Saturday of May when Eric and Abby drove their wagon down the winding mountain trail into town for their biannual supply run. The town was unusually festive, bunting in red, white, and blue draped across the balconies of the Sterling Hotel. Bartholomew Sterling owned Silver Creek. He owned the silver mines, the bank, the lumber mill, and, by extension, the town sheriff, Jeremiah Cobb. Bartholomew was a man of immense girth and immense cruelty, wearing his wealth like a weapon. He was currently standing on the boardwalk outside the assayer's office, surrounded by his sycophants and his impeccably dressed wife, Beatrice, holding court over the town he had built. Eric halted the wagon in front of Miller's Mercantile. "Stay on the buckboard, Abby," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I'll just be a minute getting the flour and coffee." "I want to stretch my legs, Pa," Abby replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "It's a beautiful day. I'll just look at the fabrics in the window." Eric hesitated, but nodded. He hated the way the townspeople looked at her, but he refused to cage her. As Eric stepped into the dim, sawdust-floored Mercantile, Abby carefully climbed down. Her boot and the iron brace struck the wooden boardwalk with a heavy, metallic clank. She limped slowly toward the window display of imported calico, unaware that Bartholomew Sterling's entourage was moving down the same stretch of boardwalk. Bartholomew, puffing on a thick Havana cigar, didn't bother to adjust his path for the young woman struggling with her gait. As they converged, one of Bartholomew's cronies brushed roughly past Abby. The sudden impact threw her off balance. Her braced leg gave out, and she fell hard against the dusty planks of the boardwalk, her bonnet tumbling into the horse-churned mud of the street. A sudden hush fell over that section of the street. Abby's cheeks burned crimson. She scrambled to right herself, her hands scraping against the rough wood. Bartholomew Sterling stopped. He looked down at her, not with pity, but with a sneer of deep, aristocratic disgust. He took a drag of his cigar and exhaled the smoke directly over her. "Well, look at this," Bartholomew boomed, his voice carrying down the street, ensuring everyone heard. "Looks like the mountain trash is spilling out of the hills again. Tell me, girl, did a mule step on you, or were you just born a cripple to match that squalid shack you live in?" Beatrice Sterling tittered behind her gloved hand. "Oh, Bartholomew, don't mind the creature. It probably doesn't understand proper English." The surrounding men erupted into raucous laughter. The sound was a physical blow. Abby froze, the tears she swore she wouldn't shed suddenly stinging her eyes. The laughter echoed against the brick facades of Silver Creek, loud, mocking, and utterly merciless. Then, the laughter abruptly choked off. The heavy oak door of Miller's Mercantile had swung open, hitting the siding with a sound like a gunshot. Eric Montgomery stepped out. The massive burlap sack of flour on his shoulder was dropped to the porch. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He simply walked toward the crowd, his boots thudding with a slow, terrifying rhythm. The crowd parted like water. Bartholomew's smile faltered, though he forced his chin up, relying on the two-armed Pinkerton guards flanked behind him. Eric reached Abby. He knelt, ignoring the mud, and gently helped her to her feet, brushing the dust from her skirts with large, calloused hands. He retrieved her ruined bonnet and handed it to her. "To the wagon, sweetheart," he said softly. Abby nodded, her shoulders trembling, and limped toward the buckboard. Eric turned slowly. He looked at Bartholomew Sterling. He didn't utter a single word. He didn't reach for the heavy Colt revolver strapped to his thigh. He simply let his icy, dead gaze bore into the wealthy baron's eyes. For 3 long seconds, the silence in Silver Creek was absolute. The message in Eric's eyes was clear. A reckoning is coming. Without a word, Eric turned, climbed onto the wagon seat, and snapped the reins. As the wagon rolled back up toward the Pine Ridge Trail, Bartholomew Sterling forced a loud, nervous scoff. "Savage," he muttered, adjusting his lapels. But the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. The ride up the mountain was agonizingly quiet. The only sounds were the creaking of the wagon wheels and the wind whispering through the lodgepole pines. Eric gripped the leather reins until his knuckles turned stark white. He could hear Abby quietly crying in the back, trying to muffle the sound by burying her face in a woolen blanket. Every muffled sob was a knife twisting in Eric's gut. He was a man who had fought off grizzly bears and survived winters that froze cattle standing up. But he felt entirely powerless against the cruelty of a rich man's tongue. By the time they reached their sturdy log cabin, dusk was painting the sky in bruises of purple and black. Eric helped Abby inside, stoked the cast-iron stove, and brewed a pot of willow bark tea. "I'm sorry, Pa," Abby whispered, staring into the tin cup. "I shouldn't have gotten off the wagon." Eric stopped dead. "The shame today belongs entirely to the men in that valley, not to you. Do you hear me?" Abby nodded, offering a weak, brave smile. The next afternoon, the distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin broke the mountain silence. Eric was chopping firewood, his axe splitting oak logs in a single violent motion. He stopped, wiped his brow, and reached for the rifle leaning against the chopping block. Visitors were rare. Unannounced visitors were dangerous. A lone rider emerged from the tree line. He wasn't one of Sterling's roughneck enforcers. He was a young man, perhaps 22, dressed in fine but sensible riding clothes. He held his hands up, showing he meant no harm, and slowly dismounted. It was William Sterling, Bartholomew's only son. Eric cocked the rifle. The metallic click echoed sharply. "You're a long way from the parlor, boy. Give me one good reason I shouldn't put a hole in you just for carrying your daddy's name." William swallowed hard, holding his ground. He didn't have his father's arrogant sneer. He had kind, intelligent brown eyes and an air of quiet defiance. "Because I didn't come here for my father, Mr. Montgomery. I came here for your daughter." Abby, who had stepped out onto the porch upon hearing the horse, gasped softly. "I was at the assayer's office yesterday," William said, his voice steadying. He took off his hat and looked directly at Abby. "I saw what happened. I saw what my father did. And I was too cowardly to step forward in front of the town and stop him. I couldn't sleep last night. I rode up here to apologize to you, Miss Anna, truly and deeply. It was abhorrent." Eric narrowed his eyes, studying the boy. "Men lie, but fear and guilt are hard to fake." Eric slowly lowered the rifle, though he didn't uncock it. Abby stepped down from the porch, her brace clanking. She looked at William, studying his earnest face. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice guarded. "Your father owns the world. We're just mountain trash." "Because my father's world is hollow," William said bitterly. "He measures a person's worth by their bank account. I've watched him ruin good people for a few extra ounces of silver. I don't want any part of it, and I've seen you in town before, Miss Anna. I've always thought you carried yourself with more grace than anyone in my father's circles." A faint blush crept up Abby's neck. Eric grunted, stepping between them. Apology spoken. Now get back on your horse, Sterling. Your kind and our kind don't mix. It only brings trouble. There's already trouble, mister. Montgomery, William said, his tone suddenly urgent, looking at Eric. That's the other reason I rode up here. My father isn't just a cruel man, he's a calculating one. When you stared him down yesterday, he realized you weren't going to be cowed. And that scares him. But worse, he's been looking at the county survey maps. Eric's grip on the rifle tightened. What about them? Your claim, William explained, stepping closer. Your 100 acres sits directly over the headwaters of the Sweetwater Creek. My father is bringing in new hydraulic mining equipment next month from San Francisco. He needs a massive, uninterrupted water supply to blast the mountainside down in the lower valley. The town creek isn't enough. My water flows down into the public basin, Eric said gruffly. It's free for the taking once it leaves my land. He doesn't want to share it, and he doesn't want to be at the mercy of someone upstream, especially a man who hates him, William warned. He plans to dam the creek right at the property line to create a reservoir exclusively for the Sterling mines. But to do that legally, he needs your land. He sent a wire this morning to Denver. He's bringing in a man named Cletus McGraw, a range detective, a hired gun. Eric felt a cold fury settle in his chest. It wasn't just about the insult anymore. It was about his home, his sanctuary. Why are you telling me this? Eric asked, his eyes searching William's for a trap. You're betraying your own family. I'm trying to prevent a murder, William said softly. My father thinks you're just a stubborn hermit he can scare off. I saw your eyes yesterday. I know you won't run. Please, Mr. Montgomery. McGraw is a killer. Take your daughter and leave. Name a price, and I'll personally make sure my father pays it in gold, fair and square. My home ain't for sale, Eric said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the terrifying finality of a rock slide. And my pride certainly ain't for sale to Bartholomew Sterling. William looked desperately at Abby, hoping she would reason with her father, but Abby stood tall, resting her hand on Eric's arm. We belong to this mountain, Mr. Sterling, she said quietly. Thank you for the warning, and thank you for the apology. But we aren't going anywhere. William nodded slowly, realizing the immovable force he had just encountered. He mounted his horse. McGraw will be here by the end of the week. May God protect you both. He turned his horse and rode back down the trail. Eric watched the boy disappear into the pines. He then looked down at his daughter. The innocence of their secluded life was over. The wealthiest man in the territory had insulted his blood and was now coming for his land. Eric walked back to the chopping block, drove his axe deep into the wood, and picked up his rifle. Abby, he said, turning toward the cabin, go inside and fetch the ammunition boxes from under the floorboards. It's time to clean the guns. The arrival of Cletus McGraw changed the very air in Silver Creek. He did not ride in with a posse of loud, drunken cowboys. He arrived on the afternoon stagecoach from Denver, a solitary figure dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that betrayed no dust. He carried a leather valise and a custom-engraved Schofield revolver. McGraw was a former operative for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, dismissed for methods that even they found too ruthless. He was a problem solver for the elite, a man who dealt in quiet intimidation and, when necessary, untraceable violence. Bartholomew Sterling met him in the private back room of the assayer's office. Maps of the Pine Ridge topography were spread across a heavy oak table. The Montgomery claim is here, Bartholomew said, tapping a diamond-ringed finger on a blue ink line representing the headwaters. He holds the original deed, signed during Governor Pitkin's tenure. It's ironclad legally, but the man is a widowed hermit with a crippled girl. Break his nerve, McGraw. I need that water diverted by the 1st of next month, or the new hydraulic cannons I purchased will be useless iron. McGraw studied the map, his pale eyes unblinking. A man with nothing to lose is a dangerous man, Mr. Sterling, but a man with a daughter, he has everything to lose. I will require 5 men, local boys, expendable, and I want my fee in unminted silver bars. Done, Bartholomew grunted. Just get them off that mountain. Up on the ridge, The Montgomery homestead was transforming from a sanctuary into a fortress. Eric had spent the week boarding up the lower windows of the cabin with thick oak planks, leaving narrow slits just wide enough for the barrel of his Winchester. He layered sandbags along the porch and rigged a series of tripwires through the surrounding brush, attaching them to empty tin cans filled with pebbles. Abby watched him work with a heavy heart. She helped where she could, melting lead in an iron crucible over the hearth to cast fresh bullets, breathing in the acrid scent of sulfur and impending doom. "Pa," she said one evening, the firelight dancing across her worried features, "is this land truly worth dying for? We could go to Wyoming. Start fresh." Eric paused, a half-finished cartridge in his hand. "It's not just the dirt, Abby. It's the memory of your mother, buried out by the dogwood tree. It's the principle. If we run because a rich man barks, we'll be running for the rest of our lives. Bartholomew Sterling thinks the world has a price tag. I aim to teach him otherwise." Despite the looming threat, the mountain was not entirely devoid of grace. 3 days after his initial visit, William Sterling returned. He didn't ride up the main trail this time. He left his horse tethered a mile down the valley and hiked up through the treacherous, jagged scree of the eastern slope, a path his father's men would never think to watch. Abby was out by the spring house, fetching cold water, when she heard the crunch of boots. She reached for the small derringer. Eric insisted she carry in her apron pocket, but paused when William stepped out from behind a massive spruce. He was out of breath, his fine clothes snagged and dirty from the climb. "William," she breathed, her grip loosening on the pistol. "You shouldn't be here. If my father sees you—" "I had to come," he said, closing the distance between them. He pulled a rolled-up parchment from his coat. "McGraw is here. My father introduced him to the town council yesterday. He's hired 5 of the worst roughnecks from the saloon. They aren't coming to negotiate, Abby. They're coming to burn you out." Abby took the parchment. It was a detailed architectural blueprint of the proposed dam, stamped with the seal of the Denver Engineering Guild. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked, her green eyes searching his face. The contrast between them was stark, the polished son of a baron and the mountain girl with an iron brace, yet the air between them hummed with an undeniable, terrifying electric pull. "Because I love you," William said, the words slipping out with a desperate honesty. He stepped closer, gently taking her hand, his thumb brushing over her calloused knuckles. "I think I have since the first time I saw you reading outside the mercantile 2 years ago. I cannot stand by and watch my family destroy yours." Abby's breath hitched. No man had ever looked at her without pity or mockery. William looked at her as if she were the most precious vein of gold in the Rockies. "William, you don't know me. We are entirely different worlds." "Then let's build a new one," he pleaded. "Take this blueprint to Judge Harrison in the neighboring county. It proves my father plans to illegally flood federal land beyond your property line to build his reservoir. It will halt the construction legally." Before Abby could respond, the unmistakable click of a rifle hammer echoed through the clearing. Eric stepped out from the shadow of the spring house, his Winchester leveled directly at William's chest. "Step away from my daughter, Sterling." "Pa, wait!" Abby cried, moving to stand between them, her heavy brace digging into the soft earth. "He brought us proof. He's trying to help." Eric's eyes flicked from the blueprint in Abby's hand to the earnest, terrified face of the young man. He saw the way William instinctively moved his arm, ready to shield Abby even from her own father. Eric slowly lowered the rifle. "You're playing a dangerous game, boy. Treason against your own blood." "My blood is poisoned, Mr. Montgomery," William replied steadily. "I'm trying to find the cure." Eric snatched the blueprints, examining the intricate lines. A grim satisfaction settled over his rugged features. "This gives us a fighting chance in a courtroom, but a courtroom is 3 days' ride away. McGraw will strike before then." Eric looked at William with a newfound grudging respect. "Go home, William. If McGraw's men find you here, they'll kill you and tell your daddy I did it." William nodded, looking back at Abby one last time. "Be safe," he whispered, before disappearing back down the rugged eastern slope. The uneasy truce of waiting shattered 2 nights later. It began not with gunfire, but with the suffocating smell of smoke. Eric awoke instantly, his survival instincts screaming. He threw off his woolen blanket and grabbed his rifle. Through the narrow slit, in the boarded-up window, he saw an orange glow bleeding through the dense pines. "Abby, get down," he roared. Flames were licking the sides of his barn. McGraw hadn't sent his men to shoot. He had sent them to burn the Montgomerys out like rats. Eric kicked open the heavy front door, moving with a speed that belied his age. He fired 3 rapid shots into the tree line, aiming at the shadows dancing in the firelight. A yelp of pain confirmed a hit. "Cover the back door," Eric yelled over his shoulder to Abby, who was already crouched behind the cast-iron stove, her hands trembling as she held a double-barreled shotgun. Eric darted out toward the barn, using the water trough for cover. He pumped water furiously, throwing buckets onto the burning wood. The roughnecks, realizing the element of surprise was lost, began firing blindly from the woods. Bullets thumped into the wet wood of the trough and whined through the air. Eric was a marksman born of necessity. He didn't waste lead. He waited for the muzzle flashes in the dark, then returned fire with deadly precision. 2 more men went down, groaning in the brush. The remaining 3, realizing they were outmatched by the mountain man's ferocity, broke and fled back down the trail. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, but the cabin stood untouched. Eric, his face smeared with soot, walked among the ashes. He found a dropped revolver and a crushed felt hat. McGraw had underestimated them. But down in Silver Creek, Bartholomew Sterling was experiencing his own kind of fire. He sat in his lavish study, a glass of expensive bourbon trembling in his hand. He was staring at an empty drawer in his mahogany desk, the drawer where he kept the engineering blueprints. The heavy door opened, and William walked in, looking pale and exhausted from his night hike. Bartholomew stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow. He didn't yell. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Where are they, William?" William stopped. He knew there was no point in lying. "I gave them to the Montgomerys. I told them to take them to the circuit judge." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. Bartholomew's face contorted from shock to a purple, suffocating rage. He crossed the room in 2 strides and backhanded his son with such force that William crashed into a bookshelf, blood instantly welling on his split lip. "You traitorous little whelp," Bartholomew hissed, standing over him. "You would ruin my empire for a crippled mountain girl? For trash? She has more dignity in her shattered leg than you have in your entire soul." William spat back, wiping the blood from his mouth. Bartholomew grabbed William by the lapels and hauled him to his feet. "You are confined to this house. If you try to leave, my guards will shoot you." He threw William back to the floor and stormed out, locking the heavy doors behind him. Bartholomew immediately summoned McGraw. The detective looked irritated by the failure of his men the night before. "Change of plans," Bartholomew barked, his eyes wild with desperation and fury. "The old man has the blueprints. If he gets them to the judge, I lose the valley. I don't care about the land anymore. I want him broken. I want him crawling to me." McGraw smiled, a thin, cruel line. "I told you, Mr. Sterling, you don't break the man. You take the daughter." Up on the mountain, the morning after the fire was tense. Eric knew they had to leave immediately. "Pack your bags, Abby," he commanded, hastily saddling their 2 remaining horses. "We're riding to the county seat. We have the proof. We just need to survive the journey." "I need to gather the medicinal herbs from the lower creek," Abby said, trying to maintain some semblance of routine to calm her nerves. "We'll need the willow bark and yarrow for the road. Make it quick." "Do not go past the old property line marker," Eric warned, handing her a woven basket. He stayed by the cabin, securing the saddlebags and loading extra ammunition. Abby limped down the familiar path toward the lower creek. The morning air was crisp, the smell of burnt pine still lingering. She knelt by the rushing water, carefully cutting the stems of the herbs. For a moment, she let herself think of William. She wondered if she would ever see him again, or if this brutal war would consume them all. She never heard them approach. McGraw was a professional. He and 2 of his remaining men had circumvented the trail entirely, tracking her from the opposite side of the creek. A heavy, gloved hand clamped over Abby's mouth, stifling her scream. She thrashed wildly, her iron brace kicking out and striking one of the men in the shin, eliciting a curse. But they were too strong. McGraw grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back, while another man tied a rough burlap sack over her head. "Easy now, little bird," McGraw whispered in her ear, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your daddy is going to come down the mountain today, and he's going to bring us exactly what we want." Back at the cabin, 20 minutes had passed. Eric walked to the edge of the clearing. "Abby," he called out. Only the echo of his own voice answered. A cold dread, heavier than any winter snow, settled in his stomach. He unslung his rifle and ran down the path, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her basket overturned by the water's edge. The freshly cut yarrow was scattered on the wet rocks, and there, pressed deep into the muddy bank, was the unmistakable footprint of a town boot, right next to the dragging, metallic scrape of Abby's iron brace. Eric fell to his knees. He touched the scrape in the mud. A sound escaped his throat, a primal, ragged roar of pure agony and blinding rage that startled the birds from the trees for miles around. Bartholomew Sterling had just made the final, fatal mistake. He hadn't broken the mountain man. He had unchained a monster. Eric marched back to the cabin. He didn't pack his bags for a journey to the judge. He went to the heavy iron lockbox, hidden beneath the floorboards. He pulled out 6 sticks of dynamite, left over from his own brief, bitter days in the silver mines. He strapped his Colt revolver to his hip, grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition, and picked up his Winchester. He didn't look back at the cabin. He mounted his horse and turned its head toward the valley. The reckoning had arrived, and Eric Montgomery was bringing hell directly to the gilded doors of Silver Creek. The descent from Pine Ridge took an hour, but for the citizens of Silver Creek, the arrival of Eric Montgomery felt like the sudden, terrifying strike of a summer flash flood. He did not ride in screaming or shooting. He rode his dark roan gelding at a slow, deliberate walk down the center of Main Street. The festive bunting from days prior still clung to the boardwalks, a mocking contrast to the grim specter of the mountain man. Townspeople took one look at the heavy bandoliers crossing his chest and the grim, dead set of his jaw, and they scattered. Saloon doors locked. Blinds were pulled shut. Even the stray dogs sensed the shift in the barometric pressure of the town and slunk into the alleys. Eric halted his horse directly in front of the Sterling Bank and Trust, the imposing, 3-story brick heart of Bartholomew's empire. He dismounted. Reaching into his saddlebag, he pulled out a thick red stick of mining dynamite. He struck a match against his boot heel, lit the short fuse, and casually tossed it into the large, ornate horse trough, sitting directly beneath the bank's imported plate glass window. Eric didn't flinch as the fuse hissed. He merely took 3 steps back. Boom. The explosion tore through the afternoon quiet with a concussive shockwave. The heavy iron trough shattered into shrapnel, sending a geyser of water and mud 50 feet into the air. The massive, gold-lettered windows of the bank blew inward in a cascade of lethal, glittering shards. Through the settling dust and screaming alarms, the heavy oak doors of the bank kicked open. Cletus McGraw emerged, his face cut by flying glass, looking ruffled for the first time since he arrived in Colorado. But he wasn't alone. He held Abby in a brutal chokehold, his custom Schofield revolver pressed tightly against her temple. Her iron brace dragged loudly as he forced her forward onto the ruined porch. Behind them, stepping out of the dust like a cowardly king, was Bartholomew Sterling. He brushed debris from his tailored waistcoat, his face a mask of furious arrogance. "Drop the rifle, Montgomery," McGraw shouted, cocking the hammer of his revolver. "Or the girl's brains paint the boardwalk." Eric stood perfectly still in the muddy street. He looked at Abby. Her face was bruised, her lip bleeding, but her green eyes were fierce. She gave him a microscopic shake of her head. "Don't surrender." "You've gone mad, mountain man," Bartholomew sneered, stepping safely behind the cover of a thick brick pillar. "You think you can ride into my town and blow up my bank? Sheriff Cobb and his deputies are already surrounding you. You're a dead man. And once they hang you, I'll send your crippled girl to the workhouse." Eric slowly unslung his Winchester. He didn't drop it. He lowered it to his side. "I didn't come to shoot your sheriff, Bartholomew, and I didn't come to negotiate with your hired dog." Eric opened his heavy canvas duster. Strapped across his chest, wired tightly together with blasting caps, were 5 more sticks of dynamite. In his left hand, he held a lit cigar he had taken from his saddlebag. Bartholomew's sneer instantly evaporated. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. Even McGraw's grip on Abby faltered as his eyes locked onto the explosives. "You're standing over the main vault," Eric said, his voice carrying the deep, resonant calm of an avalanche about to break. "I know how this bank was built. I hauled the timber for it. A blast this size, right on the porch, will crack the foundation and drop this entire 3-story brick building straight down into the cellar. Every ledger, every deed, every ounce of unminted silver you own will be buried under 1,000 tons of rubble." "You'll kill your own daughter!" Bartholomew stammered, his bravado shattering. "No," a new voice rang out. From the shattered second-story window of the bank, William Sterling leaned out. His face was battered from his father's fists, but he held a double-barreled shotgun aimed squarely down at Cletus McGraw's back. "Let her go, McGraw," William commanded, his voice cracking but resolute. "You pull that trigger, I cut you in half before she hits the ground." Bartholomew stared up at his son in absolute horror. "William, put that down! You are a Sterling!" "I am nothing to you," William roared back, tears of rage in his eyes. "You're a monster, father, and it ends today. Let her go, McGraw. Now." McGraw was a calculating killer, and the mathematics of the situation had just turned fatal. Caught between a boy with a shotgun at his back and a madman with a chest full of dynamite to his front, there was no profit left to be made. Slowly, McGraw uncocked the revolver. He shoved Abby forward and raised his hands. Abby stumbled down the steps, her brace clanking heavily. Eric caught her with his right arm, pulling her tightly against his side. He didn't take his eyes off Bartholomew. "William," Eric called out, his voice softening just a fraction. "Bring Judge Harrison the blueprints. Tell him everything." "I will," William promised, keeping the shotgun leveled on McGraw. Eric then stepped forward, walking slowly up the steps until he was inches away from the trembling Baron of Silver Creek. He raised the lit cigar, letting the glowing cherry hover a fraction of an inch from the main fuse on his chest. Bartholomew's knees buckled. The wealthiest man in Colorado collapsed onto the shattered glass of his own bank, weeping openly, his hands raised in a pathetic plea for his life and his fortune. Eric looked down at him. "You laughed at my daughter," Eric said, his words etching themselves into the history of the town forever. "You mocked her broken leg, thinking it made her weak, but she walks with more strength than you ever possessed. You thought your gold made you a god, Bartholomew. But out here, gold is just yellow dirt, and dirt is all you are." Eric didn't light the fuse. He didn't need to. He had broken the man completely. He turned his back on the weeping Baron, wrapped his arms securely around his daughter, and began the long walk back up the mountain trail, leaving the ruins of Bartholomew Sterling's pride scattered in the mud behind him. The dust eventually settled in Silver Creek. Bartholomew Sterling's empire crumbled beneath federal investigations, while William took the remnants to build a legitimate, fair lumber trade. High on the Pine Ridge, the Montgomery cabin remained a sanctuary. Only now, when Eric sat on the porch carving wood, he wasn't alone. He watched his daughter, Abby, walking by the creek, her hand resting securely in William's, proving that true wealth isn't mined from the earth, but forged in the fires of unwavering love.
Hi, my name is Ivy Duck Devotion, the owner and manager of Ivy Duck Devotion. After watching the video, you laugh at my daughter, the mountain man's words that made the richest man fall to his knees. I would really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most in this story was the quiet strength of a father protecting his child's dignity. The mountain man didn't respond with cruelty or revenge, but with honesty and conviction. And somehow, that carried more weight than anger ever could. It's a reminder that real respect can't be bought with money or status. And sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who stay calm when they've every reason not to. Do you think people sometimes underestimate others based on appearance or background? And what would you have done in that situation if someone mocked someone you loved? Stories like this make me think about how important it is to stand up for people who may not always have a voice in the room. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these emotional mountain man stories, feel free to like and subscribe for more journeys like this.